The notification pinged on my phone as I was finishing my last conference call of the day. Another ordinary Wednesday in April, with spring finally breaking through after a particularly harsh Chicago winter. I had been half listening to my colleagues' quarterly projections, while mentally planning the weekend hike I'd promised my 10-year-old son, Jake. When the call ended, I absent-mindedly checked my phone. The notification was from Instagram, not my usual distraction, but the preview showed my wife Allison had been tagged in a photo. We'd been separated for 6 months, a trial period she had insisted on after 12 years of marriage. "I need space to figure things out," she had said while packing a small suitcase. "This isn't necessarily the end." I hadn't planned on looking. We had established boundaries, and social media stalking wasn't going to help either of us figure things out. But there was her name, and my thumb moved of its own accord. The image loaded. Allison on a beach I didn't recognize, leaning into the embrace of a man I didn't know, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist, her smile wider and more carefree than I had seen in years. The caption, written by Allison herself, was succinct in its finality. "Finally free. New beginnings. Life after." The world tilted slightly. My office, with its familiar family photos still prominently displayed on my desk, suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. I set the phone down carefully, as if the image might somehow be less real if handled gently. 12 years of marriage, a 10-year-old son, a mortgage, joint retirement accounts, family holidays, and a shared Netflix profile that still suggested shows because you watched things we had enjoyed together. All apparently summed up and dismissed with "finally free." I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to absorb the impact, then closed Instagram and opened my email. If this was her way of communicating that our separation had progressed to something more permanent, I needed to respond appropriately, practically, legally. I had just started drafting an email to a divorce attorney a colleague had recommended when my phone rang. An unknown number with a local area code. "Hello, is this Nathan Parker?" a woman's voice inquired when I answered. "Yes, speaking." "Mr. Parker, this is Andrea Reynolds from Goldstein Family Law. I believe you're the husband of Allison Parker?" I confirmed this fact, confused by the timing. Had Allison already secured legal representation? "Mr. Parker, I'm afraid there's been a significant misunderstanding that requires immediate clarification. Would you be available to meet this afternoon?" Andrea Reynolds' office was in one of those sleek downtown buildings with security turnstiles in the lobby and elevator banks that required keycards. I had left work early, telling my assistant I had a family matter to attend to. Technically true, though family felt like an increasingly nebulous concept. The law firm occupied the entire 32nd floor, its reception area decorated in tasteful neutrals with abstract art that probably cost more than my car. I gave my name to the receptionist, half expecting to be told that Allison was waiting inside, perhaps with her beach companion, ready to present me with divorce papers as a team. Instead, I was led to a conference room where Andrea Reynolds sat alone. She was perhaps in her mid-50s, with steel gray hair cut in a precise bob and the kind of self-possession that comes from decades of navigating high-conflict situations. She rose to shake my hand, her grip firm and professional. "Mr. Parker, thank you for coming on such short notice. Please have a seat." I sat across from her at the polished conference table, bracing myself for whatever was coming. "I appreciate you making time for me, though I'm still not clear on why I'm here." Andrea folded her hands on the table. "I represent Allison Parker, or rather, I did until this morning, when I withdrew as her counsel. I believe I have an ethical obligation to inform you of certain facts before you take any legal action based on potentially misleading information." My confusion must have been evident, because she continued without prompting. 6 weeks ago, your wife retained me to begin divorce proceedings against you. She described your marriage as irretrievably broken and indicated that you were aware of her intention to divorce, but were, in her words, in denial about the inevitability of the situation. Each word landed like a small, precise blow. 6 weeks ago, Allison and I had spoken on the phone about Jake's upcoming school science fair. She had sounded distracted, but not unusually so. There had been no mention of divorce, no indication that our trial separation had progressed to legal dissolution. "That's not accurate," I said carefully. We agreed to a temporary separation 6 months ago. There have been no discussions about divorce. Andrea nodded as if this confirmed something. During our initial consultation, Mrs. Parker also informed me that you had already consulted with several divorce attorneys in the Chicago area, which created potential conflicts of interest for many firms. This was entirely false. Until seeing that Instagram post an hour ago, I hadn't considered contacting a divorce attorney. Again, not true, I replied, my confusion deepening. Why would she say that? It's a tactic some individuals use to limit their spouse's access to top legal representation, Andrea explained matter-of-factly. By claiming you've already consulted with multiple firms, she effectively conflicted them out of representing you. The calculated nature of this maneuver struck me as so foreign to the woman I had married that I briefly wondered if we were discussing a different Allison Parker. I don't understand, I said finally. If you were representing Allison, why are you telling me this? Isn't that a breach of confidentiality? Andrea's expression remained professional, but took on a hint of something harder to define, perhaps distaste. Normally, I would not disclose any information about a client or former client. However, certain actions have created an ethical dilemma that I believe justifies limited disclosure. She opened a folder on the table and removed a document, sliding it across to me.
3 days ago, Mrs. Parker instructed my office to file this petition for dissolution of marriage. It includes an affidavit signed by her claiming that you abandoned the family home 6 months ago, that she has been Jake's primary caregiver throughout your marriage, and that you have expressed disinterest in maintaining significant parenting time post-divorce. I scanned the document, my disbelief growing with each paragraph.
The affidavit described a version of our marriage and separation that was entirely fictional. In reality, Allison had been the one to leave our home. I had been actively co-parenting Jake throughout the separation, with our son staying with me Monday through Thursday, and with Allison Friday through Sunday to accommodate her new work schedule. This is completely false, I said, hearing the edge in my voice. Every major claim in this document is a lie. Andrea nodded. I became concerned when these assertions contradicted information that emerged during our preparation process. When questioned, Mrs. Parker insisted the affidavit was accurate. This morning, my assistant discovered the social media post that I believe you've seen. The beach photo with her caption about being finally free. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. The man in that photo is Carlton Reed. He's a family court judge in Cook County, specifically the judge who would likely have been assigned to your divorce case based on the filing jurisdiction. The implication landed with stunning clarity. Allison wasn't just involved with someone new. She was involved with the judge who would potentially be deciding the terms of our divorce. That created an ethical conflict I could not ignore, Andrea continued. I withdrew as counsel immediately and felt obligated to inform you of the situation before any legal proceedings advanced based on fraudulent information. I sat back, trying to absorb what I was hearing. The Allison I thought I knew, the pediatric nurse who volunteered at animal shelters, the woman who had cried at our wedding as we promised to honor and cherish each other, had deliberately lied in legal documents, attempted to manipulate the legal system, and was now apparently celebrating her freedom with the judge who might oversee our divorce. What happens now? I asked, feeling unmoored in this new reality. That depends on what you want to happen, Andrea replied, but I strongly suggest you retain counsel immediately. I can recommend several excellent attorneys who would be well equipped to protect your interests in this situation. 3 days later, I sat in the office of Martin Abernathy, a family law attorney with 30 years of experience and a reputation for ethical but effective advocacy. His office was less imposing than Andrea Reynolds's sleek downtown space, located in a converted Victorian in Lincoln Park, with bookshelves lining the walls and a desk that looked like it had witnessed decades of difficult conversations. The good news, Martin said, after reviewing the documents Andrea had provided and the additional information I had gathered, is that you have a strong position here. The attempted manipulation of the legal system through a relationship with a judge is extremely serious. Judge Reed will almost certainly have to recuse himself from any involvement in your case, and the fraudulent affidavit creates significant credibility issues for your wife's claims. I'm less concerned about legal advantage and more worried about Jake, I admitted. He adores his mother. Finding out she lied about our family situation would devastate him. Martin nodded, his expression softening. That's commendable, and it's why I think you're making the right choice with the approach we discussed. Protecting your son while still ensuring your rights are respected is a delicate balance. The approach we had outlined was straightforward. I would file for divorce first, with an accurate affidavit detailing our actual living arrangements and parenting practices. We would request that Allison's relationship with Judge Reed be formally disclosed and that any proceedings be assigned to a judge without connections to either party. Most importantly, we would propose a parenting plan that maintained stability for Jake while ensuring both parents remained actively involved in his life. What about Allison's false affidavit? I asked. Won't that be entered into the record if we proceed? Since it hasn't been filed with the court yet, technically it doesn't exist in the legal sense, Martin explained. Ms. Reynolds withdrew as counsel before submission. However, the fact that your wife was willing to sign a fraudulent document under penalty of perjury could become relevant if credibility becomes an issue later in the proceedings. I nodded, still struggling to reconcile the Allison who would sign false statements about our family with the woman I had built a life with for 12 years. Have you had any contact with Allison since learning about this? Martin asked. No, I admitted. I'm not sure what to say. I know you're sleeping with the judge who was supposed to handle our divorce. Doesn't exactly make for a productive conversation starter. Martin's mouth twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. Probably wise to maintain distance until we filed. Speaking of which, how do you want to handle the Instagram post? It could be useful evidence if things become contentious. I had been thinking about that beach photo continuously since seeing it. Not just the betrayal it represented, but the baffling decision to make it public while simultaneously filing misleading legal documents. Save it, I decided. But let's not lead with it unless absolutely necessary. Despite everything, she's still Jake's mother. As I left Martin's office with a plan in place, my phone buzzed with a text from Allison. We need to talk about Jake's summer schedule. Can we meet tomorrow? The casual tone, as if we were just co-parents working out logistics rather than spouses where one was actively deceiving the other, struck me as surreal. After consulting with Martin, I replied simply, I'm available after 5 p.m. at the coffee shop near Jake's school. The following evening, I arrived at the coffee shop early, selecting a table in the corner that offered some privacy while still being in a public space. The venue had been Martin's suggestion, neutral territory with witnesses, just in case the conversation took an unexpected turn. Allison arrived precisely at 5, looking tanned from her beach trip, but with an underlying tension visible in her posture. She wore the casual elegance she had always managed effortlessly. Fitted jeans, a silk blouse in her signature blue, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Thanks for meeting, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. I wanted to discuss Jake's summer camps. I found a few options that would work with my schedule. No mention of Instagram posts, beach companions, or divorce proceedings. Just straight to summer scheduling, as if nothing had changed. Before we discuss summer, I replied carefully, I think we need to clarify where things stand with our separation. I saw your Instagram post. Her expression flickered briefly, surprise, concern, before settling into something more neutral. Oh, that. Yes, that, I confirmed. It seems to indicate you've made decisions about our future that you haven't communicated to me directly. Allison sighed, looking momentarily uncomfortable before regaining her composure. I was going to talk to you about it this weekend. The separation isn't working for me, Nathan. I've moved on, and I think it's time we formalize things. The practice delivery suggested she had rehearsed this speech, perhaps expecting it to be the opening move rather than a response to my direct reference to her post. By formalize, you mean divorce, I clarified. Yes, I think it's for the best. I nodded slowly, choosing my next words with care. And when were you planning to tell me about retaining Andrea Reynolds 6 weeks ago? Or about the affidavit you signed claiming I abandoned our family? The color drained from Allison's face so rapidly, I momentarily worried she might faint. How did you... Allison began, then stopped herself, visibly recalibrating. Andrea Reynolds contacted you? That's a serious breach of attorney-client privilege. She could be disbarred for that. Her immediate focus on the legal consequences for Andrea, rather than the ethical implications of her own actions, was telling. The Allison I thought I knew would have been mortified at being caught in a lie. This Allison seemed primarily concerned with how the lie had been exposed. Ms. Reynolds withdrew as your counsel before contacting me, I replied evenly. She felt an ethical obligation to prevent fraud upon the court. Apparently, your relationship with Judge Reed created a conflict she couldn't ignore. Allison's eyes widened slightly. Whether at the mention of Reed's name or the realization that I knew about their connection, I couldn't tell. She glanced around the coffee shop, perhaps checking if anyone was within earshot of our conversation. Carlton and I are just friends, she said, her tone deliberately casual. We met at a hospital fundraiser months ago. The photo was taken during a group beach outing that included several colleagues. The ready explanation, delivered with practiced sincerity, made me wonder how many other lies had been presented with equal conviction during our marriage. Regardless of the nature of your relationship, I said, keeping my voice steady, the fact remains that you signed a false affidavit and attempted to file for divorce with misleading information about our family situation. Why would you claim I abandoned our home when you were the one who left? Why misrepresent our parenting arrangement when we've been successfully co-parenting Jake for 6 months? Allison's expression hardened, the pretense of casual explanation giving way to something colder. My attorney advised me that establishing certain narratives early would lead to more favorable outcomes. Favorable for whom? I asked. Certainly not for Jake, who would be confused and hurt by claims that contradict his lived reality. Not for me, obviously. So just favorable for you. You don't understand how these things work, Nathan, she replied, an edge of condescension entering her voice. Divorce is a legal battleground. Everyone approaches it strategically. By lying under oath? By getting involved with the judge assigned to your case? That's not strategy, Allison. That's potentially criminal. She flinched at the word criminal, then leaned forward, lowering her voice. Look, I may have been overzealous in how I approach this, but my intentions were to protect Jake and ensure stability for his future. I've been his primary caregiver since birth. That's simply not true, I interrupted, my calm finally fracturing. We have shared parenting responsibilities throughout our marriage. Since the separation, I've had him more days each week than you have, by your choice. You took the weekend schedule because it interfered less with your new social life. The accuracy of this observation seemed to momentarily silence her. In the quiet that followed, I recognized something fundamental had shifted, not just in how I viewed Allison, but in how I understood our entire relationship. The woman across from me was not simply making poor choices in a difficult situation. She was revealing character traits that had perhaps always been present, but never directed against me until now. I've retained counsel, I said finally, breaking the silence. Martin Abernathy will be filing divorce papers next week with an accurate accounting of our living arrangements and parenting responsibilities. Judge Reed will obviously need to recuse himself, and any proceedings will be assigned to a neutral judge with no connections to either of us. Allison's expression shifted rapidly, surprise, calculation, and finally something approaching resignation. You're really going to make this difficult, aren't you? The question was so disconnected from reality that I almost laughed. I'm going to make this honest, I corrected. If that's difficult for you, it's because of choices you've made, not mine. She sat back, arms crossed defensively. So what happens now? Now we focus on what matters, minimizing the impact on Jake while we work through this process. I'm proposing a continuation of our current parenting schedule, which seems to be working well for him. I have no interest in limiting your role in his life or creating unnecessary conflict. My measured response seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. Perhaps she had anticipated, even hoped for, an emotional confrontation that would reinforce her narrative of me as unreasonable or unstable. And the Instagram post? She asked after a moment. The affidavit? I have copies of both, I confirmed. I hope we won't need to introduce them into evidence, but that depends largely on how we proceed from here. If you're willing to engage in good faith negotiations based on our actual circumstances, I see no reason to escalate matters. The implied consequence hung between us, a warning that while I preferred an amicable resolution, I was prepared to defend myself against further deception if necessary. Allison nodded slowly, the calculation visible in her expression. I'll need to speak with my new attorney. I assume Andrea gave you a list of everyone I supposedly conflicted out. She did, I confirmed, along with clarification that those conflicts were fabricated. You're free to retain any counsel you choose, preferably someone who will advise ethical and honest approaches moving forward. As our conversation concluded without resolution of the summer scheduling that had been its ostensible purpose, I felt an unexpected sense of clarity. The Instagram post that had initially devastated me had ultimately been a gift, an early warning system that revealed Allison's true intentions before her legal strategy could take full effect. Walking home in the spring evening, I found myself grateful to Andrea Reynolds, whose ethical compass had prevented a potential miscarriage of justice. The path ahead would undoubtedly be difficult, but at least now I could navigate it with open eyes and appropriate defenses against whatever might come next. The following weeks unfolded with a surreal combination of mundane routines and extraordinary revelations. Martin filed our divorce petition as planned, with Jake continuing his established schedule between our homes, while remaining blissfully unaware of the legal machinations surrounding his parents' separation. Allison retained new counsel, a partner at one of Chicago's most aggressive family law firms, known for scorched earth litigation tactics. However, the opening salvo I had anticipated never materialized. Instead, her attorney requested a temporary continuation of the status quo while they reassessed their position in light of recent developments. Those developments, as Martin discreetly informed me, extended beyond our case. Judge Carlton Reed had abruptly requested a leave of absence from his judicial duties, citing personal reasons. The timing suggested that Allison's Instagram post and the questions it had raised about his impartiality had created professional complications beyond their romantic entanglement. The Judicial Ethics Committee doesn't look kindly on judges who date litigants appearing in their courtroom, Martin explained during one of our update meetings. Even if he recused himself from your specific case, the appearance of impropriety is problematic. I felt no satisfaction in Reed's professional difficulties, just as I took no pleasure in the unraveling of Allison's strategic maneuvers. The entire situation remained profoundly sad, a cascade of poor decisions that threatened to damage not just our family but potentially her nursing career if the falsified affidavit became a matter of public record. 3 weeks after our coffee shop conversation, Allison requested another meeting, this time at her apartment, with Jake spending the evening at a friend's house to give us privacy. Her new living space reflected the transitional nature of her current life, a furnished 2-bedroom in a modern building downtown, decorated with a few familiar items from our home, but largely impersonal. She had made tea before my arrival, the cups arranged carefully on coasters on the glass coffee table, a touch of domesticity that felt oddly performative under the circumstances. "Thank you for coming," she began, her tone more subdued than during our previous encounter. "I've had time to reflect on my approach to this situation, and I recognize that some of my choices were misguided." The careful understatement, misguided, rather than dishonest or potentially illegal, suggested this was a strategic retreat rather than a genuine moral reckoning. Still, it represented progress toward a less adversarial process. "I'm glad to hear that," I replied neutrally. "Where does that leave us in terms of moving forward?" Allison took a sip of her tea before responding. "My attorney has reviewed your proposed parenting plan. It's more generous than I expected. You're not trying to limit my time with Jake or use my mistakes as leverage. Jake needs both his parents," I said simply. "My issues with your choices don't change that fundamental fact." She nodded slowly, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, perhaps trying to determine if my reasonableness was genuine or tactical. "Carlton and I are no longer seeing each other," she offered after a moment. "That situation has become complicated for obvious reasons." I acknowledged this information with a nod, not particularly interested in the details of their relationship's demise. "I'm more concerned with establishing a functional co-parenting dynamic than with your personal life, Allison." "That's very mature of you," she said, a hint of the old Allison briefly visible in her wry smile. "Though I suppose one of us needs to be the adult here." The self-deprecating comment, an acknowledgement, however oblique, of her recent behavior, created a momentary connection that reminded me of the woman I had once loved. The recognition was bittersweet, a glimpse of what had been lost alongside the stark reality of what now remained. "My attorney is preparing a response to your filing," she continued, her tone becoming more businesslike. "We're proposing some modifications to the financial terms, but we're in agreement with the parenting schedule as outlined. I'd like to resolve this without protracted litigation if possible. The shift from her initial scorched earth approach to this more reasonable position represented a significant de-escalation, likely influenced by the weakening of her legal position after the exposure of her earlier tactics. That's my preference as well, I confirmed. For Jake's sake, and frankly for our own well-being. Contentious divorces drain emotional and financial resources that would be better directed elsewhere. As our conversation continued, addressing practical matters of asset division and logistical arrangements for Jake's activities, I found myself reflecting on the strange path that had led us to this point. The Instagram post that had initially felt like a deliberate wound had ultimately prevented a much more damaging outcome, one where false narratives might have shaped legal decisions with long-lasting consequences. "There's one more thing," Allison said as our discussion wound down. "I've been offered a position at Northwestern Memorial, a significant promotion from my current role, but with more predictable hours. If I accept, I'd like to revisit the parenting schedule to align better with my new situation." The request was reasonable on its face, career advancement that could ultimately benefit Jake through improved financial stability and potentially more quality parenting time. Yet after the deceptions of recent months, I found myself approaching even straightforward matters with newfound caution. "Let's see the specific schedule once you have it," I suggested. "I'm open to adjustments that serve Jake's best interests, but any changes would need to be gradual and carefully managed to minimize disruption to his routine." Allison nodded, seemingly satisfied with this measured response. As I prepared to leave, she hesitated, then asked, "How much does Jake know about what's happening between us?" "Only that we're working through adult issues while both continuing to love him completely," I replied. "He knows we're getting divorced, but not the circumstances or complications. I've been careful not to share details that might alter his relationship with you." Something flickered across her face. Gratitude, perhaps, or recognition of a kindness she hadn't extended to me. "Thank you for that," she said quietly. "Despite everything, I never wanted to hurt him." The statement hung between us, an acknowledgement that while she might have been willing to hurt me through deception, Jake's well-being remained a shared priority that transcended our broken marriage. As I walked to my car, I realized that the woman who had posted "finally free" on that beach photograph had been participating in an illusion as misleading as the false affidavit she had signed. True freedom wasn't found in deception or strategic manipulation, but in facing reality with integrity and accountability, a lesson Allison was now learning through painful experience. 6 months after Andrea Reynolds' unexpected phone call, I sat in the mediator's office alongside Martin as we finalized the terms of our divorce settlement. Across the table, Allison and her attorney reviewed the documents that would formally end our 12-year marriage. The journey to this moment had been neither straight nor simple. After our conversation in her apartment, Allison had indeed accepted the position at Northwestern Memorial, necessitating adjustments to our parenting schedule. The negotiation of these changes had been surprisingly collaborative, with both of us prioritizing Jake's stability while accommodating professional responsibilities. More complicated had been the untangling of our financial lives, the division of retirement accounts, determination of what would happen with our family home, and allocation of debts accumulated during the marriage. Through it all, Martin had been a steady guide, helping me distinguish between battles worth fighting and compromises that served the greater goal of an expeditious, fair resolution. "If you're both satisfied with the terms as written," the mediator said, sliding the final agreement toward us, "we can proceed with signatures today. This will then be submitted to the court for approval, though that's essentially a formality at this point." I reviewed the document one final time, though its contents held few surprises after months of negotiation. The parenting plan formalized our revised schedule, with Jake spending alternating weeks with each parent once Allison's new position began. Financial assets had been divided equitably, with me retaining the family home and its mortgage, while Allison received a larger portion of our investments to offset the equity difference. Most importantly, the agreement contained no false narratives or misrepresentations of our family circumstances, just the straightforward reality of two people who had once built a life together and were now constructing separate but connected futures with their child's well-being at the center. As I signed my name on the designated lines, I felt an unexpected sense of peace, rather than the finality or grief I had anticipated.
Perhaps those emotions had been processed gradually over the preceding months, or perhaps they would emerge later when the practical matters were fully resolved. For now, I simply felt ready to move forward, unburdened by the weight of uncertainty that had characterized the past year. Allison signed after me, her expression similarly reflective rather than triumphant or defeated. When she finished, she looked up and met my eyes directly for perhaps the first time since our separation began.
"Thank you," she said quietly, "for handling this with more grace than I initially showed." The acknowledgement, not quite an apology but closer than I had expected, suggested a level of self-awareness that had been absent during the early stages of our separation. "We both want what's best for Jake," I replied simply. That common ground made other differences easier to navigate. After completing the necessary paperwork, we exited the mediator's office together, an oddly companionable moment given the purpose of our meeting. Outside on the sidewalk, with Martin discreetly giving us space for a private word, Allison paused before we would head in separate directions. "I've been thinking a lot about that Instagram post," she said, surprising me with the direct reference to what had been an unspoken topic for months. It was impulsive and inconsiderate. I was caught up in what felt like a new beginning without considering how it would affect you or potentially Jake. The acknowledgement was unexpected, particularly given her consistent avoidance of discussing her relationship with Reed or the false affidavit she had prepared. The post turned out to be fortuitous in an odd way, I admitted. Without it, Andrea Reynolds might never have recognized the ethical issues with your case. The outcome could have been much messier for everyone, especially Jake. Allison nodded, a rueful expression crossing her features. Life has a strange way of course-correcting sometimes. Not always gently, but effectively. She glanced at her watch. "I should go, meeting with the new department head this afternoon. Will you be picking up Jake from soccer tomorrow, or should I?" The swift transition from philosophical reflection to practical co-parenting logistics exemplified our new relationship. Moments of connection, interspersed with the business-like coordination that would characterize our interactions moving forward. "I'll get him," I confirmed. "Good luck with your meeting." As we parted ways, Allison toward the parking garage, me toward the train station, I reflected on the circuitous path that had led to this moment of relative peace. The Instagram post that had initially seemed like a deliberate act of cruelty had triggered a cascade of events that ultimately prevented a far more damaging outcome. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake's soccer coach. "Jake played great today, scored 2 goals, said to tell you he can't wait for your weekend hiking trip." The simple message centered me instantly, a reminder of what truly mattered amid the legal complexities now concluding. Whatever else had changed, and so much had, my relationship with my son remained the constant that anchored my world. That evening, I removed the last of Allison's photos from my living room walls, replacing them with images of Jake and me from recent adventures, not erasing the past, but making space for the present reality and future possibilities. As I worked, I found myself surprisingly grateful to Andrea Reynolds, whose ethical stance had altered the trajectory of our divorce in ways that allowed for this measured, relatively amicable resolution. The lawyer's call, coming immediately after that devastating Instagram post, had been the intervention that transformed what might have been a bitter legal battle based on false narratives into a process that, while painful, had ultimately preserved the possibility of respectful co-parenting and personal growth. As I hung the final photograph, Jake grinning atop a mountain we had climbed together the previous month, I silently acknowledged that sometimes the most painful revelations create space for unexpected healing, and that truth, however difficult to face initially, provides a more solid foundation than even the most comforting illusions. 1 year after finalizing our divorce, I stood in the crowded gymnasium of Jake's elementary school, watching him receive an academic achievement award at the 5th grade graduation ceremony. From across the room, I spotted Allison arriving slightly late, slipping into a seat near the back. Our eyes met briefly, and she offered a small wave of acknowledgement. After the ceremony, Jake bounded over to me, his medal proudly displayed on his chest. "Dad, did you see? Mrs. Abernathy said I got the highest math score in the whole grade." "I saw, buddy. I'm incredibly proud of you." I pulled him into a quick hug, conscious of his growing awareness of peer perceptions. At 11, He was increasingly concerned about appearing cool in front of his friends, though still affectionate in less public moments. "Is Mom here?" he asked, scanning the crowd. "I want to show her my medal before she has to go back to work." "She's over by the doorway," I replied, spotting Allison in her Northwestern Memorial scrubs, clearly having come directly from her shift to make the ceremony. "Why don't you go show her while I chat with your teacher for a minute?" Jake darted off through the crowd, navigating between clusters of proud parents and excited fifth graders, with the single-minded determination that characterized his approach to most things. I watched as he reached Allison, her face lighting up with genuine pride as she examined his medal and pulled him into an embrace. This was the new normal we had established over the past year. Separate lives connected through our shared love for Jake. Civil interactions at school events and activity drop-offs. Coordinated but distinct parenting approaches that somehow combined to provide him with stability despite the significant changes in his family structure. Mrs. Henderson, Jake's teacher, approached with a warm smile. "Jake has had such a wonderful year, Mr. Parker. His resilience through all the changes has been remarkable. He's adjusted better than I could have hoped," I acknowledged. "We've both tried to keep his routine as consistent as possible despite the new arrangements." "It shows," she assured me. "Some children really struggle during parental separation, but Jake has maintained his academic focus and social connections. That's a credit to how you and Ms. Parker have handled the situation." The compliment felt like validation of the countless difficult moments over the past year. The careful conversations about holiday schedules, the coordination of parent-teacher conferences, the measured responses when Jake tested boundaries between his two households. None of it had been easy, but the alternative, a bitter, contentious divorce with Jake caught in the crossfire, would have been immeasurably worse. After chatting with Mrs. Henderson, I made my way toward Allison and Jake, arriving just as she was explaining that she needed to return to the hospital for the remainder of her shift. "We're still on for pizza night Friday, right, Mom?" Jake asked, his expression hopeful. "Absolutely," Allison confirmed. "I've already put in for the whole evening off. Movie marathon after dinner as promised." Jake's smile suggested this was a treasured routine, something special they had established during their time together that didn't include me. I felt a momentary pang, not of jealousy, but of recognition that divorced parenting inevitably meant missing certain moments in your child's life. As Jake ran off to join his friends for the post-ceremony refreshments, Allison turned to me with an expression that had become familiar over the past year, professional courtesy layered over the complex history between us. "He looks happy," she observed. "Settled." "He is," I agreed. "The week-on, week-off schedule seems to be working well for him now that he's adjusted to it." Allison nodded, then hesitated before adding, "I wanted to let you know. I've been seeing someone for a few months. It's becoming more serious, and I'd like to introduce him to Jake soon. I wanted to discuss it with you first." The information landed differently than I might have expected a year earlier. There was no jealousy or resentment, just appreciation for the courtesy of advance notice about someone who might potentially become part of Jake's life. "I appreciate you telling me," I replied. "When you're ready for that step, maybe we could all meet informally first, just to make the introduction more comfortable for Jake." Allison looked momentarily surprised by this suggestion, perhaps having anticipated a more guarded response. "That's very reasonable. Thank you." As we stood there in the elementary school gymnasium, surrounded by the controlled chaos of excited fifth graders and their families, I realized how completely the landscape had shifted. Since that moment, I had seen her Instagram post declaring herself finally free. The freedom she had celebrated then, impulsively, prematurely, and at the expense of honesty, had proven illusory, complicated by the consequences of her choices. The freedom we had both gradually, painfully achieved since then was more authentic. The freedom to parent according to our values, to establish new boundaries and relationships, and to model for Jake that even difficult endings could lead to respectful new beginnings. "I should get back to the hospital," Allison said, checking her watch. "Would you tell Jake I'll call him tonight before bedtime?" "Of course," I agreed. "And Allison? He really is thriving. Whatever else happened between us, we're doing something right with him." She smiled, a genuine expression that momentarily recalled the woman I had once loved, before complications and choices had irrevocably altered our path. "We are," she agreed. "That's the one thing that matters most." As she left and I turned to find Jake among his classmates, I reflected on the strange journey that had begun with a devastating social media post and an unexpected phone call. The lawyer who had reached out to me that day, following her ethical compass rather than her client's instructions, had changed everything, creating space for truth to emerge before false narratives could take root in court records and legal decisions. The result wasn't the happy ending of a reconciled marriage or the dramatic satisfaction of public vindication, but something more nuanced and ultimately more valuable. A recalibrated relationship built on reality rather than deception, focused on our son's well-being rather than personal grievances. It wasn't perfect, and certain wounds would likely never fully heal. But watching Jake proudly show his medal to his friends, secure in the knowledge that both his parents would celebrate his achievement despite living separate lives, I felt profound gratitude for the intervention that had made this outcome possible, the phone call that had changed everything. 2 years after Jake's 5th grade graduation, I stood in the backyard of my home, our home now, just Jake and me during my parenting weeks, watching him practice pitching techniques for his upcoming baseball season. At 13, he had grown several inches in recent months, his movements caught in that awkward transition between child and teenager, sometimes graceful and sometimes comically uncoordinated, as he adjusted to his changing body. "You're dropping your elbow," I called out, demonstrating the correct position. "Try to keep it higher through the motion." Jake adjusted his stance, his expression concentrated as he worked to incorporate the feedback. The next pitch flew straight and true, hitting the target we had set up with satisfying precision. "That's it," I encouraged. "Much better control that way." His grin, still boyish despite the increasing angles of his maturing face, revealed pride in the accomplishment. These ordinary moments had become the foundation of our relationship during the post-divorce years. Practical instruction, shared activities, the quiet building of confidence and skills that would serve him throughout life. My phone buzzed with a text from Allison. Jake left his science project research at my place. Need it before Monday? The easy coordination of co-parenting logistics had become routine. Our communication direct and focused on Jake's needs rather than our past conflicts. Allison had married Michael, the man she had cautiously introduced to Jake 18 months earlier, in a small ceremony the previous summer. Jake had served as ring bearer, comfortable with his mother's new husband after a gradual, thoughtful integration into their family life. I texted back, "If convenient, coming your direction tomorrow for the baseball equipment sale anyway." Her reply came quickly, "Perfect. We'll be home all morning. Michael made Jake's favorite cookies yesterday," sending some back with the project. This casual mention of Michael's baking, his unexpected passion for creating elaborate desserts had quickly endeared him to Jake, reflected how our extended family configuration had evolved. Not friends exactly, but cooperative participants in the shared project of raising Jake with as much stability and support as possible. As Jake continued practicing, I reflected on how differently things might have unfolded without Andrea Reynolds' pivotal phone call. The false narrative Allison had initially constructed, painting me as an absent father who had abandoned our family, could have potentially shaped legal decisions with long-lasting consequences for all of us, especially Jake. Instead, the intervention had created space for truth to emerge and for more measured approaches to prevail. While the early months after that Instagram post and subsequent revelations had been painful and disorienting, they had ultimately led to a divorce process focused on practical solutions rather than punitive measures or strategic advantages. "Dad?" Jake's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Can we invite Mom and Michael to my first game next month? Coach said I might be starting pitcher, and I want everyone there." The simple request reflected Jake's healthy adjustment to our restructured family, no longer seeing his parents' separation as a division of loyalties, but as a reconfiguration that could still include moments of shared celebration. "Of course," I assured him. "I'll text your mom about it tonight. I'm sure they'd love to come." Jake nodded, satisfied, and returned to his pitching practice with renewed focus. Watching him, this remarkable, resilient child who had navigated the dissolution of his parents' marriage with surprising grace, I felt a profound gratitude for how things had ultimately unfolded. The Instagram post that had initially felt like a deliberate wound had actually been the first domino in a sequence that prevented a much more damaging outcome. Allison's impulsive declaration of being finally free had triggered Andrea Reynolds' ethical concerns, which in turn had allowed me to approach our divorce with clear information rather than responding blindly to false accusations. The freedom Allison had prematurely celebrated on that beach had proven more complicated than she had anticipated, requiring accountability and compromise rather than simple liberation from unwanted commitments. The freedom I had gradually achieved since then was quieter but more substantial. Freedom from uncertainty about my place in Jake's life. Freedom to build new routines and traditions that reflected our evolving needs. Freedom to eventually consider new relationships without the shadow of betrayal coloring my perspective. As the evening light began to fade, I called to Jake that it was time to wrap up practice. He threw one final pitch, perfect form, straight over the target, before jogging over with the satisfaction of progress made. "That last one felt great, Dad," he said, his face flushed with exertion and accomplishment. "You've really got the technique down now," I agreed, resting my hand briefly on his shoulder. The casual physical connection that remained acceptable, even as other forms of parental affection had become subject to teenage scrutiny. Together, we gathered the equipment and headed inside, where dinner preparation and homework awaited. The ordinary rhythms of a family life that had been reconfigured but not diminished by the events set in motion 2 years earlier. That night, after Jake had gone to bed, I found myself looking at old family photos, not with regret or nostalgia, but with a kind of peaceful acknowledgement of what had been and what now was. The marriage captured in those images had ended, but the family, though transformed, continued. And it had all hinged on that unexpected phone call, a moment of ethical clarity from a lawyer who chose truth over strategic advantage, setting in motion a process that allowed reality, rather than deception, to shape whatever came next. What a journey we've taken with Nathan today, from that shocking Instagram post to the peaceful co-parenting relationship that eventually emerged. His story reminds us that sometimes painful revelations can ultimately lead to healthier outcomes than comfortable deceptions. Have you ever experienced a moment when difficult truth ultimately protected you from something worse? Or perhaps you've navigated the complex waters of co-parenting after divorce? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to our channel for more explorations of relationships, resilience, and renewal. Each week, we share stories that remind us of our capacity to adapt and grow, even through life's most challenging transitions. Don't forget to like this video and hit that notification bell so you never miss our new uploads. Your engagement helps our community grow and allows us to continue bringing these meaningful narratives to life. Thank you for joining me today. Remember, sometimes the most unexpected interventions, like that lawyer's phone call, can change everything for the better. Until next time.